The Society for Culture and Environment extends a warm welcome. You are watching a session in Hot Blood, Bachi Karkaria in conversation with Shailaja Srinivasan. Bachi Karkaria is an Indian journalist and columnist. She has served as an editor at the Times of India and has also helped create new brands for the Bennett Coleman and Company Limited media group. She has authored several books. Shailaja Srinivasan is a Bhopal based children's book editor and enthusiast. She studied geological oceanography. In her spare time, Shailaja loves gardening.
So I'd like to welcome you all to the session, this conversation with Bachi Karkaria about the book In Hot Blood. And I'd like to begin by inviting you to please read the prologue to set the context for our audience before we get into questions.
Now that they've given me a razor, which I hope I will not fall off, because it doesn't look very firm. I should go up there and read. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for filling the post-lunch hall. I hope you all remain awake, because just being in the hall isn't enough. I'd really not like any of you to sleep off, doze off after that lunch. And I hope you will enjoy the session. How many of you are familiar with the case? Very good. How many of you have seen Rustam? Ooh, devil. Only women at once. All right. But yes, I know people are familiar with the case because it has become part of urban mythology. It's had not just the life of an amazing kind during the happening, because if you are from Bombay, you would know that it completely set the city on fire, and like crowds packed the courtrooms. They even packed it to the degree that the plaster began to fall, and they banged on the doors when they were not being let in, and there had to be a lathi charge, and women were swooning all over the place, especially the Parsi women, and of all ages, by the way, and they were throwing lipstick kisses to the commander because he was this wonderful, handsome, dashing Parsi man. And the whole story was portrayed, as a story of love, honor, and betrayal, largely by the media. So you see, the media isn't to blame only now. It's got a long history of distorting facts. And so you had Lucy Karanja, who really made the case, and the case made this. And but I think that what I have brought to it is a fresh perspective, and I think I've brought a lot of fact into it, and it is really the first non-fiction book on the case, and it's a case that really changed so much in India, and it's amazing. I mean, I was commissioned by Juggernaut to do it, and I think they commissioned me because they knew there'd be interest in it after Rustam. But when I began to read the story and the archives, I realized, what a far-reaching case it was. That not only was it the country's first upper-class crime of passion, the strange thing really is this, that a case which started in adultery, ended with murder, but then still needed to have a constitution bench. It kind of created a huge rift between the executive and the judiciary, and we are seeing that as well today. And it was really the first time that a person of influence tried to subvert the course of justice. And we've seen that with every decade, from the Jyotindra Jain case, right down to the Maria Susiraj case, now to the Jessica Lal case, and the Tandoor murder. Everywhere, it's been a politically powerful person trying to subvert justice. And as Fali Nariman pointed out, and he was really very helpful for me for this book, that in the Nanavati case, the law stood by the law. But of course the executive, then twisted and turned, and amazing things happened, So it is really quite, and of course it brought the end of the jury system. But of course it was not the reason for it, because there was already the 14th Law Commission was already seized of the matter. So you don't just stop the jury like that overnight. So, Shailaja, if I can just continue a little bit longer since you're on jury, I really want to tell you that people who knew nothing about the case knew two things about it, and both of them were false. One was that this jury, that they said this is the case which actually ended the jury system. No, it just was the last nail in the coffin of the jury system. The other thing that everyone remembers is that very Rhett Butler, frankly my dear, I don't give a damn, kind of line from Gone with the Wind, where everyone thinks that, and there are variations which kind of add more and more salacious details as it gets told, that Nanavati went and confronted Ahuja, who was lying naked. Some stories will tell you. Some will add he was smoking a cigar, in his bathtub. And Commander Nanavati asked him, will you do the honorable thing and marry my wife and take care of my children? And Prem Ahuja drawled and said, do you expect me to marry every woman I sleep with? Now, this is patently false. I would swear by that, not because I was there, but really this is what a close reading of the judgments has definitely led me to believe, and that is indeed what the judgment said. And this is again, I think, coming from a journalistic background, you do know that the disgruntled or the person with an agenda will give you the smoothest, sexiest story. But if you really, ask the next question, even at the risk of spoiling the excitement of your story, you will get another thing. So while reading the pages of the Blitz, it was so easy to do this fabulous story, of heroism and valor and betrayal. But when you actually steel yourself and went to those dull, long judgments, you got a completely different story. And I think that is what I have tried to encapsulate in the book, but with, as my kind introducing lady said, with a page turner style. And frankly, it's no credit to me, because this story did have the most amazing twists and turns. So like each time it really was like the Yogi Berra thing, that it's not over till it's over. Each time you thought, okay, now this is the end for the hero, when like in Greek tragedy, the Deus Ex Machina descends and saves the day. So that's what kept happening in the case of Nanavati. But I'm sorry, I don't want to take up so much time, I should read the prologue. Way back in 27 April 1959, a Parsi naval commander, Kavas Nanavati, shot dead his English wife Sylvia Sindhi lover Prem Ahuja. 3 bullets in less than 3 minutes is all it took. But the trial, which began the following September, held the nation enthralled for 5 years, and the story has continued to have as obsessive an afterlife in books, in films, even PhD theses. Its immediate allure is easy enough to explain. This was India's first upper-class tribe of passion, and it titillated a society still in the socialist straitjacket. Pythagoras himself could not have come up with a more perfect right-angled triangle. Handsome naval officer in dazzling whites, seduced wife in repentant black, and the easily demonized dead playboy businessman. There was the unequal pitting of upright Parsi against unscrupulous Sindhi. The setting infused the tale with its own legend. Bombay was an urban grail, a glittering cosmopolitan Camelot with streets paved with opportunity and stardust. The class, the caste, the context was such a triple whammy that they had knocked out all else. But those 3 quick shots, fired by Commander Nanavati, had a much wider reverberation, echoing right into the present. There are 3 main narratives that deserve greater engagement. The case, the high-octane drama from Sessions to Supreme Court apart, the case honed fine points of criminal jurisprudence. It also foretold the way that elite mafias would manipulate the system to subvert justice. The Nanavati trial set a pattern, but it has also remained unique. In none of its high-profile successors, which bloodied every decade, were the topmost echelons of executive and judiciary locked in such a bristling turf war. In none of them was a prime minister obliged to intervene. The media. Courts are the de jure custodians of criminal justice, but a relentless fourth estate is often the de facto arbiter. In the hoary expression, vox populi, vox dei, the modern media, the voice of the people, increasingly arrogates to itself the voice of God, or the voice of the nation today. This too began with the weekly Bombay newspaper Blitz's espousal of Nanavati's case. In those days of black and white, Blitz managed to create a technicolor story. In both content and form, it became the masterclass for the covering of crime. The Triangle. None of the case's prodigious spin-offs has examined the extent to which privilege and prejudice loaded the dice of public perception. We have been even more coy about the complex man-woman equation within marriage and outside. Geometry's triangles are simple, not so the others compassed by chemistry. For too long we believed in those cliches of unalloyed hero, unmitigated villain, and his unwitting victim. They tend to be deconstructed, if not actually dismantled. Did something less edifying lurk beneath the fanciful tapestry of love and honor woven by Nanavati's lawyer? How much of this upright officer's actions were driven by the twice-born entitlements of Bombay Parsi background and hothouse naval culture? Who was the human behind the unidimensional arch-villain, Prem Ahuja? Doesn't Sylvia deserve today's prism of empowerment? She should be seen as a woman who wanted something more than what her marriage gave her, and actively went for it, eyes wide open or almost. And what of the aftermath? The Canada years have remained unexplored till now. We know that Kavas and Sylvia's reconciliation made the defense team's job easier. But how did they ultimately weather the storm, salvage their marriage, and script a new love story? Despite the energy expended for over half a century on L'Affaire Nanavati, it's not an open book, nor yet an open and shut case, not by a long shot.
Thank you for that reading. And so part of your comments, you already answered the question, what endures? You know, and that story till today. The events happened long back.
Yeah.
And I really like the way you fleshed out the characters. Captain Nanavati, his wife Sylvia.
The mic closer.
Hold the mic closer, okay. Thank you. And Prem Ahuja. Well, one character who, in the story, perhaps you didn't get enough information at the time and maybe you did later. Mamie Ahuja. I mean, she still stands quieter in the background, although she could have played a very big role in averting the tragedy and also her kindness to agree to the pardon.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, maybe Ahuja, straight, I mean, no one's asked me this question before, but I'll try and answer it. And yeah, maybe Ahuja was the sister of Prem Ahuja. And she had been kind of, chaperoning, if you like, the affair of Sylvia and Kavas, Sylvia and Prem. And she kind of, went along when they went on a trip to Agra, spent the night over there, and at the case, she was right there, answering questions in a very level and very good manner, because in fact, all the judges really made a distinction between Mamie's testimony and Sylvia's testimony. And they were extremely unkind to Sylvia and said to her, "Madam, your lover is dead, you only have your husband, and therefore you're just going along with the story crafted by the defense." And And they also said, you kept your husband in deception for 18 months, and so why should we believe anything that you have to say now? But maybe Ahuja, they said her testimony has been consistent throughout. There may be just a little difference in syntax, but in the main, Mimi was highly recommended by the judges. Now, when you say that Mimi played a very marginal part, well, she was the sister, the husband was dead, that's about it. But what Mimi did was employ this very young lawyer, Ram Jethmalani. And he was like virtually unknown. And I think either she took a shine to him or he took a shine to her. I don't quite know. But maybe the first. And being a fellow Sindhi, she employed Ram Jethmalani to have a watching brief. So during a Sessions Court case, only the public prosecutor actually, speaks. And the watching brief lawyer is there to ensure that the dead person is not completely, demonized. Really look after the interests of the victim. Now, Ram Jethmalani was a very, very, very junior lawyer at that time, but he was still the astute man which would later reveal itself, over the years. And he, what happened was that the defense said that Nanavati, after hearing his wife's confession, went to Prem Ahuja's flat in Jeevan Jodh and banged on the door, entered, and he was known to them because they had already been introduced by another naval commander. And he went in, so the servants just let him in. So he was carrying this Smith, well, first he was carrying it in a brown envelope, this .38 Smith & Wesson revolver. And he marched in, and there was Prem Ahuja, who had emerged from his bar, combing his hair at his mirror, and he only had this loose towel, wrapped around him. And so the Nanavati's lawyer, Karl Khandalawala, was an even more romantic, flamboyant character. 6 foot tall, the terror of the criminal courts, brilliant articulation, great art historian, and all that. The true Renaissance man. And so he had done this whole choreography that Nanavati went in. He asked, will you marry my wife? Will you marry my wife and look after my children? And then this is what Prem Ahuja apparently did. And then there was this scuffle that Prem Ahuja lunged for the envelope, and of course the judges said, and so did the prosecution, he didn't know that there was a gun in that envelope, so where was the case of him lunging? And then there was the scuffle, and in the meanwhile the gun went off 3 times by accident, and then Ahuja lay dead. So everyone, the jury was like enraptured by this story. The naval commander would come into the courtroom in all his dazzling whites, with the naval escort, because he somehow avoided prison or police custody and was managed to be kept in naval custody, which itself was a travesty, because this was not a naval case, it was not against any naval person, it was not on naval ground, and it wasn't about a naval issue. But he still managed it, so every day he'd come with naval escort, sirens blowing, etc. So the jury, as well as those swooning women, were completely taken up. And they gave actually a not guilty verdict. But what Ram Ahuja pointed out to the prosecutor was that if this great big scuffle happened, how come that towel that Ahuja was wearing didn't slip off? And that's actually a lovely story, because the Bombay hawker has always got his eye on the main chance. So this is the first time that merchandise related to any event began to appear. And so the Bombay hawker was selling Nanavati guns and Ahuja towels. And they were shouting, Nanavati ka pistol, bang, bang, bang. Ahuja ka tauliya, marega to bhi nahi girega. And that was when they called it. That was the revolution part that Ram Jethmalani did. So that is benefits that she had managed to get from. Then, as you said, even in the part of the pardon, yeah, so
Serenity that surrounded the pardon,
Yeah.
that Bhai Pratap, another Sindhi, the pardon from the governor basically came with, it was, it would have, I have a question in there. The pardon happened because there was another Sindhi community gentleman, Bhai Pratap, who had fallen foul of the law and had been imprisoned for a bit. And there was a petition to pardon him, which coincided very nicely with the governor wanting to pardon Nanavati as well. So it just served really well to pardon Nanavati and pardon Bhai Pratap, both together. But what would have happened had there not been Bhai Pratap on the scene? Would the governor have really gone that extra length? They'd been blatant enough to do everything till that point.
I fear he would have. Because you really must remember that Nanavati had this double barrel gun going for him in his favor. Yeah, because he really, first there was the Navy and all that whole political background of that. So he was the blue-eyed boy of Krishna Menon. And Krishna Menon had been defense minister. And then also Commander Nanavati had sailed the high seas, had just come back with the INS Mysore recently commissioned. He was second in command there. Pandit Nehru had gone to receive the ship. He and Indira had a sleepover on the ship. So Nanavati had conducted joint exercises, with the Mediterranean fleet, at which time Mountbatten was kind of over there. So Nanavati's opportunities to impress had been great. He had rubbed shoulders with the high and mighty. And the second thing was that he was a Bombay Parsi. And that was really the most elite club you could belong to in the 1950s, because they really were at the commanding heights of industry, commerce, law, culture. Only the Parsis knew when not to clap between the movements. Really. So there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek stuff like that about the Parsis, which the Parsis have not liked. But the Sindhis have thought that, I'm rooting for the Parsis, and so the Sindhis have also not liked the book. So it just happened. And so I think, yes, the kind of concessions that were given to Nanavati, I'm sure would have continued. And would they have dared? Well, yes, because again, if you remember, that the Parsis were this highly influential people, and people with they came, with DNA, with uprightness and correctness and doing the right thing. They had in the PR department, they were like way up there. And the poor Sindhis who had just arrived, from partition, and they only made money, really. And also these were socialist times. Today it will not be in this way, painted in your face capitalism. But those were the days of the socialist straitjacket, where anyone who made money was considered a lower form of life. And so therefore, I think they would have got away with it. They would have really got away with that. Because remember, this was not the first pardon that he got. Because when the High Court gave him a life sentence, within 4 hours, the governor, that was another governor at that time of Bombay, still the Bombay state, he issued this executive statement where the sentence was supposed to be suspended. Not just till the appeal is heard, but till the appeal is disposed of. And that's when Pandit Nehru had to answer all these questions at his monthly press conference. That how come this man is being granted all these privileges? So he would have got away with it, I'm sure. And even when he was served the sentence, even when he was served the pardon, he had already, like all influential people, had begun to sort of find all kinds of ailments and had spent a good time in the hospital rather than in the jail. And when the pardon was served to him, he was on parole in a salubrious bungalow in Granada.
Very exciting visitors. You mentioned in your book you also entertain very exciting visitors over there.
Yeah, Janet Leigh. Janet Leigh, the actress, came up one day with Palkiwala and I've forgotten, my goodness. Yeah, Palkiwala and his lawyer. They came up. Yeah.
Very,
So that kind of goes to show the elite circles that Nanavati.
I'm going to ask you another question before we throw it open to the audience, because we'll be running out of time pretty soon. So now, putting on your agony aunt hat and your author hat, if Premi Ahuja had written to you for help, how do I help my brother? What advice would you give him?
This is a googly question. All right. Well, I do this agony aunt column in the Mumbai Mirror. It's called Living Yarn. And I think I wouldn't, if anyone who reads that column of mine, I don't take any great moral judgment point in that. I do consider adults as adults. And in fact, that is a question that I raised in this book as well. That if you say that it's all right, if you go by Nanavati and the way the case developed, and if you think that Nanavati was right in being pardoned and that what he went out and did was correct, then you are trying to say that to kill an unarmed man in really cold blood is less moral or is more acceptable than two adults having a consensual relationship. And consensual it was, because unlike in many other cases, there was no question of Sylvia being dragged and drugged and raped or any such thing. Though the defense did try to make out that Prem Ahuja had an evil hold and that she had hypnotized Sylvia, and Blitz cooked up all kinds of stories about him giving love potions to people. And then I met somebody who finally had known Jerson, who had known Prem Ahuja, Jerson Takuna, this advertising man. And he said, what nonsense, Prem was such a charmer, he didn't need any potions, yellow, purple or pink. And so I would tell her that, look, your brother's an adult, Sylvia is an adult. If they want to go and have an affair, you can just caution your brother on the sense that, he's playing with fire, not in going to bed with a married woman, but in going to bed with a woman married to a very influential man. And so you should be a little careful over here. And once again, this whole business of Sindhi versus Parsi and businessman versus commander, it was really made out as if, here was a naval commander out for months, at sea in the service of the country, and to seduce his wife was like almost a seditious act. And that is really how they portrayed it. And so really this whole business of public perception and how you can mold public perception, and how many lawyers in this audience? Thank God. Okay. How lawyers? And in fact, the judge said, because you see, Nanavati, when he shot Ahuja, he came out of Jeevan Jyot brandishing his pistol, and the watchman tried to stop him, and he said, don't stop me, I myself am going to the police station. And the watchman said, lekin aapne ye kya kiya? So he said, I've shot Ahuja because he had relations with my wife. So it was almost a confession. Then he couldn't find the police station, so he went back to his own provost marshal on the ship and said, I've shot a man. He didn't say I killed him, because at that point he didn't know he had killed him. And again, when Samuel asked him why, he said, because he seduced my wife. Then, so the provost marshal sent him to John Lobo, the head of Crime Branch, CID in Bombay. And there too, he virtually surrendered, And but when he stood up in the court, he pleaded not guilty. So that was again a U-turn. And the judge, one of the judges said that Nanavati was an honest man till he met his lawyers.
would you say is the modern avatar of Blitz? Name one. Or many.
I don't think so. Actually, really, every broadsheet has become a tabloid. So, in fact, and I must feel guilty because I know that I have created papers which we kind of called broad loins, which really had the substance of a broadsheet and the drama and the glamour and the masala of a tabloid. So, and television, blogs, I mean, media is completely out of control.
Coming from a media person, it's not being said.
It's true, yeah. I'm old-fashioned.
I'd like to invite the audience if they have any questions.
It's from a legal body which I want to know. There are two extrajudicial confessions. As you said, there are two extrajudicial confessions. He admitting to this car outside that he had shot somebody. And then again later on also saying the same thing. Were this not extrajudicial confessions after making two extrajudicial confessions, how did he turn around and said he's not guilty? He took a non-guilty plea.
Right.
But where was two extrajudicial confessions taken into account?
Well, that is it, but the first jury, I told you, was completely overwhelmed by the optics of this whole business. You remember this man coming every day with all sirens blowing, all his medals flashing, the crowd outside. Karl Khandalawala, no less, and Lucy Karandia, really the fourth member of the defense team out there in the street, whipping up the story.
I'm just interrupting, but my question is very simple. He had made this confession, which is known as extrajudicial confession, to two people. When he took a not guilty plea, when these two people before whom he had made the extrajudicial confession, when they witnesses before the court, when they examined and cross-examined.
Well, actually, Puran Singh was not cited, that is the watchman. He was not put into people were kind of, you're blaming the CBI today for not following cases fully and doing a slipshod job. So at that time, the prosecution also had done a slipshod job and had not included Puran Singh's statement. And because it was just two people were in the room when it happened, and one of them was dead and the other was the accused, it had to go a lot by circumstantial evidence. John Lobo did go and say, but he said, I've shot a man. Now, it's not as if I've shot him in cold blood. And Karl Khandalawala's story of the scuffle was what carried the day with the jury. But the jury said not guilty. But the judge then dismissed that jury measure and verdict and said this is a perverse judgment and sent it to the High Court. And he also sort of added that in view of the commander's reputation, his first time, and the circumstances of the case, I would recommend a light sentence. But when the High Court heard the case, it actually gave him a life sentence. He said a light sentence, and the High Court gave him a life sentence, and with rigorous imprisonment. But the governor then suspended that sentence. And even when it went to the Supreme Court, it upheld what the High Court had done. It dismissed his appeal and it sent him to prison. So the law went by the actual circumstances of the case.
I'm quite surprised because the fact that suspension of a sentence, does the governor have the power to suspend a sentence?
Well, that was what the whole issue which became, that Article 142 versus Article 161, and that is why a constitution, so the Bombay High Court actually set up a bench to examine this issue, and they came to the conclusion that yes, the governor has acted in the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law, and therefore we have to go by what has happened. But Justice Gajendra Dhakkar in the Supreme Court told his fellow judges, no, this is a travesty, this is an insult to the judiciary's powers, and therefore we have to get a whole constitution bench of the Supreme Court presided over by the Chief Justice to discuss this matter. And that's where they again discussed this point of view. So this case really kind of, came up with a lot of, the one about what is grave and sudden provocation, how much does Article 161 and 142, when they come into conflict, who prevails? And as you can see that today even this issue hasn't been decided.
Here. There is somebody here.
I think I've read your book and I brought it here. I think we cannot imagine this case without the role of Lucy Karanjia and Yates. So can you tell me something about the Lucy Karanjia's role in I think.
Well, actually we did talk about Rustam, but the thing that bothered me the most about the film was the way that the Lucy Karanjia character was portrayed. Like he was made into this utter buffoon, who kept on being stupid and kept on being thrown into jail. Whereas Lucy Karanjia was one of the most suave, Clark Gable-like characters, in real life that you could think of. He was very communist, and in fact, this is also a fact of the case, that it was this very left lobby which was rooting for him. So it was Krishna Menon, Rajni Patel, and Lucy Karanjia, all very big Russia, supported by Russia and supporters of Russia. And on the other side was Dosu Karaka, who had another tabloid, The Current. So it was The Current and The Blitz, which were the two big tabloids. Now Lucy Karanjia also, both of these guys, I mean, you think, people who ran tabloids were some scruffy guys, but these two were, really part of Bombay high society again, both Parsi, both, Dosu Karaka was an Oxford man, who really kind of been part of the Oxford Debating Society and all that. Lucy Karanjia was also supposed to have gone to Oxford, but he began to write a series of letters to the Times of India about a case at that time, and it's in the book but I've forgotten, he would write one letter supporting that case, and then in another name, he would write another letter, on the other side. And so giving perfectly cogent arguments on both sides. And the editor of the Times of India was very intrigued by these two names who hadn't appeared earlier, and made a few inquiries and found it was the same man. A young fellow, must have been not even in his 20s. And he gave him a job. And so he didn't go to Oxford, but then he sent him abroad for training and with the Navy Telegraph, I think. But when he came back, he thought he would get the editors, become the first Indian editor of the Times of India. But instead, that job went to Frank Moraes. So then, Lucy Karanjia and Irritation founded the Blitz. And the Blitz really became, the full red top tabloid, that it was. And he really, he was only a weekly. And all his people said, we will come at the tail end, the dailies will have already covered the story. But he turned threat into opportunity and weakness into strength. And he said, no, we will now project this whole thing like in a feature way. So, he took all kinds of, he did woodcut illustrations, he did screaming headlines, he did, timelines, he found all kinds of fictitious people. He didn't worry about, a small detail like the truth. And as it was said, he was economical with the truth. And he really did, project a master class in the covering of crime. Like today when you say, kind of make it into a story, have these big illustrations, reconstruct the crime in a comic book form. I mean, we do all that today, but it was all done in Lucy Karanjia's time. Each time he got something, he would make it out as if it was a big scoop, and the story of getting the scoop became a story.
And then I'd like you to please tell the story of the gentleman tabloid owners. Karaka had a lot of material, explosive material against.
My God, you really read the book and who are the so normally I can do these things easily because I get sent questions, but this is a little out of syllabus. Sorry. Yeah, so and by the way, she tells me this is the first interview she's done.
It truly is.
So hats off to you. No, so Rusika, I mean, this is really not to do with the case, but those who Karaka, these were gentlemen of the old school for all this, and those who sold the current to Ayub Sayed, and so he was clearing his desk, and Irfan Khan, who at that time was working with him, kind of chanced upon this whole file, which possibly had been put together by the CIA because he was close to CIA and because Rusi Karanjia was Russian, right? And remember, this was all the time of the Cold War and socialist India and all that. So in his drawer, there was this whole dossier with a lot of incriminating material about Rusi Karanjia. And so Irfan said, well, can I have this? And those who said absolutely not. And he said, instead drive me to Rusi Karanja's office and go and ask Rusi to come down. And because I can't climb those stairs. And in fact, when Irfan Khan walked into Rusi's office, Rusi thought he had come for a job, and he said, yes, so what kind of salary do you want? So he said, no, I haven't come here for a job. I've come because my boss wants you to come down and see him. And he went down, and Karaka just wordlessly handed him that file. So he didn't, exploit it in any way. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions? Or how are we doing, Radhika?
If there are no questions, I think we will.
Okay.
Okay.
Last call. Right. I'm going to thank Pachiji for having been with us.
Thank you for watching the session from BLF 2019. Kindly subscribe to our channel for more such videos.